as represented by the America First policy. Increasingly, globalization is considered to be the root cause of the growing income and asset disparities, or undesired movement of people. But is globalization to blame for the decreasing number of workers? Indeed, parts and components come from all over the world as part of the global supply chain and value chain brought on by free trade and investment through FTA, which is an institutional aspect of globalization, or is technological innovation, such as AI and robotics, causing a major social transformation. The first industrial revolution faced conservative reaction from the Luddite movement. Yet, we also know that historically, technology has created more jobs through economic growth. Is Industry 4.0 different from the past revolutions with its speed and magnitude? For economic growth to absorb shadow of globalization and Industry 4.0, there is a need for institutions, namely Bretton Woods system and other international public goods, to evolve. We need to restore trust and confidence in these institutions. Whether one likes or not, globalization will continue to progress. And with Industry 4.0, each country is required to face the problems of disparities and poverty. Inclusive growth will be a major challenge in pursuing regional integration. The process to cope with this challenge is something similar to creating a new domestic social contract. In other words, each country is required to create a better globalization. For the growth strategy for this region to succeed, I think it is essential that we cooperate with each other and promote mega FTAs. Since the US leadership is now hospitalized for a while, I think it is our region that must take on the role of the promoter of free trade and take action for economic integration. I end my remarks by hoping that today's forum will further strengthen our bond in this region, promote economic integration, and contribute to the sustainable development of our economies. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Mr. President Kosaka-san, for your remarks. Thanks for bringing out the importance, relevance, and centrality of multilateralism in our system. I have now great pleasure in inviting Ambassador Amar Sinha, who is Distinguished Fellow at RIS. After superannuating in 2017 with his distinguished service of 35 years in Ministry of External Affairs, he has joined RIS, but he is also on board of several other entities. More important, I I consider is his being with the board of Barefoot College, and this is one extremely important organization. I would request him to elaborate on that a bit for benefit of everyone. But he's also on board of Hindustan Petroleum Corporation, which is another major public sector enterprise. He was India's ambassador in Indonesia, and he also served in Afghanistan. So he understands the challenges of conflict and the dangers of exclusions that our world processes lead to. And now I would like to invite Ambassador Amar Sinha.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I didn't know that I had to make a speech, first of all, greetings to President Kusaka, my dear friend and batchmate Preeti Saran, and DG Sachin Chaturvedi, and all the dignitaries here. Today, of course, RIS, on behalf of RIS, I must express my happiness that the Japan Economic Foundation has chosen us as their partner to host this forum in Delhi. We feel that it is not only timely, it's a very, very important initiative. Particularly so because India not only is a big economy and fairly globalized, but also it has a different perspective and a view on multilateralism and the way it has evolved. Let us look at the theme: geopolitics, trade, technology, and integration. If you actually go through these words, you would see that more than integration, each one of them have also become a source of division in the global context. And of course, we will be discussing the role of technology and the intellectual property regime and how it has affected developing countries in terms of creating. But I'll leave it for the next session. He mentioned something in terms of Barefoot College, where I'm helping them in whatever little way I could. Barefoot College is a unique South-South sort of cooperative initiative, in fact, which India took the lead with some social entrepreneurs, famously Mr. Bankar Roy. I don't know how many of you have heard. But basically it proves just two things. It proves that the monopoly of technology or technical knowledge does not rest with people who come with technical degrees. And it actually proves it on ground, because what it does, its main thrust or the major program that it runs is called the Solar Mama program, where it brings in uneducated women, mainly grandmothers, without any degree, from different countries. They are put together for a 6-month course together in a place called Tilonia near Jaipur. And in 6 months, these women who have had no formal education go back as trained solar technicians. And they not only acquire this ability and this expertise, but they go back and actually light up homes. And today we are very proud that there are nearly 3,000 solar mamas around the world, in most of the developing countries in Africa, Asia Pacific, in our own region. And together they are producing nearly 1,400 megawatts of electricity, which is what perhaps a small-sized nuclear plant produces. And that is no mean achievement. And in fact, if you just Googled Barefoot College, and you will find a number of videos from Guatemala, from Zambia, and Sierra Leone of these women who have done. But besides making them engineers, we also empower them in terms of giving them 3 skills. We make them small entrepreneurs. We give them education on personal health and hygiene, which is something that they also lack besides electricity in the villages. And we train them in basic accountancy and bookkeeping so that they can actually run an enterprise. And that, I think, is also a great sign of globalization at a micro level, which at least the large corporations miss. And I have always said that these are really the foot soldiers of an institution. We started this Solar Mama program 10 years ago. And it was only after 10 years that India thought of setting up this International Solar Alliance. So, but we had started creating the foot soldiers of this Solar Alliance, perhaps maybe not connected, but 10 years ago. So I will leave it at that, and I would just introduce our main speaker, Preeti Saran, we have been together in the service since 1982. We, of course, started together, and I am very happy that we also ended together our innings, in a sense that both of us worked at the ministry together. I, of course, am older, so I retired a year before she did, and she has been out of the government precisely for 7 weeks. And before this, she was in charge of what exactly we are looking at, the geography, Asia Pacific. She was Secretary East, and if you look east from India right to the coast of South America was her domain. And everything you see between India and Latin America she was in charge of all the countries in the region. And that is the remit of Secretary East, which is half the world, as we say. So Preeti, without much further ado, let me invite you to address this gathering and deliver your keynote address. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Amar, for that very kind introduction. And thank you, RIS and Jeff, for organizing this symposium and for inviting me to share my thoughts on this very important topic on protecting the global trading system and the role for multilateralism. Quite apart from the fact that as Secretary East, I looked after the Indo-Pacific region. So in terms of political, strategic aspects of the relationship, yes, I could make a comment, but I can see from the experts sitting here and what I've read about the information of the participants, clearly I am amidst trade experts and economists, and since I am neither claim to be either a trade expert or an economist, I will try to give my own perspective, an Indian perspective on how we see the evolution of the global trading system and the role for multilateralism, especially in the current context where there are frictions in the global consensus building efforts and they are multiplying each day. Of course, the latest in the series of the events that have led to apprehensions and uncertainty comes from the recently concluded APEC summit that was held in Papua New Guinea. The Asia Pacific leaders who participated in the summit, for the first time, failed to come to an agreement on a joint communique. This is the first time in the history of APEC, as deep fault lines emerged between the United States and China over issues of trade. And while reports of a trade war between these two big trading giants have been in the news for quite some time, what made the APEC case interesting is the breakdown of consensus over issues that concern the reforms of the WTO. And the WTO has been the most robust and vibrant institution for multilateral trade negotiation that evolved to some form of maturity and is now experiencing a virtual free fall. And for an Indian professional diplomat to actually wax eloquent on the efficacy of WTO just shows how far we have come from the times when we negotiated and participated in the Uruguay rounds or the Doha development round, where we failed to get that basic policy space or the special and differential treatment that India and Indian delegation or other developing country nations were constantly struggling to achieve in these negotiations. And therefore, much of the failure of the WTO can be attributed to unfulfilled commitments on the part of the developed world, issues of special and differential treatment for developing countries, failure to close the Doha round, and opening up of new areas of multilateral trade negotiations, which actually had very little to do with trade and went way beyond, including, for example, when it came to TRIPS and the flexibilities that developing countries fought for, or whether there was the policy space that we struggled in, or a sister organization when it came to TRIPS negotiations, was the World Intellectual Property Organization, where again developing countries had to fight and struggle to lodge a development agenda into those TRIPS plus kind of negotiations that we had to struggle with. However, today, the disengagement and going back on abandoned strategies of trade protectionism are a recent phenomenon, and they're not coming out of these developing countries who actually struggle for that policy space, and therefore it is a disturbing trend. Unilateralism or unilateral trade arrangements that give unfair advantages to a few or distort the markets are equally reprehensible. This goes fundamentally against the assertions about free trade, particularly at a juncture when developing countries at large have started to see trade integration as an opportunity rather than a challenge. And I again reiterate that it was a huge challenge for developing countries, including India, that had remained a closed economy, where levels of development of our economies, there was no parity at all, none whatsoever. For us to have kept pace with and harmonized our rules, our regulations, was a challenge itself. And then suddenly we find that it is not the developing countries that are challenging the whole process, but the challenges are coming from elsewhere. That said, the successful conclusion of the Trade Facilitation Agreement was a confirmation of the belief that when countries agreed to walk the extra mile to streamline processes, that could allow for deeper trade integration. The TFA, which is the Trade Facilitation Agreement, came about in times at the WTO platform when regionalism and bilateral trade agreements have already picked steam. However, failure in consensus building efforts on several occasions, increasingly because of disagreement between two of the leading economies, have caused severe stress for the global recovery. It has also failed to take cognizance of the fact that growth nodes of the world economy has now got more distributed, and many southern economies, both big and small, are in fact driving GDP growth and world trade. Another disturbing development has been the clever strategies to leverage this growth potential